While digging in the ground, the old man suddenly discovered a large amount of gold nuggets. The glittering golden light reflected on his face. For a moment, he dared not believe it was real, and he was so excited that he even wept aloud. Decades of gold panning had finally paid off. To facilitate transport, he separated the gold into small chunks and loaded them onto his horse, ready to return to town to spend his remaining years in peace. But just as he descended the mountain, he ran into trouble. A group of Nazi soldiers happened to collide head-on with him. Although they were invaders, Aatami didn't want any trouble right now. He just wanted to leave quickly. After all, they had the numbers. However, the group of soldiers revealed sinister smiles, seeming to imply that he would absolutely not leave here alive. But just as a soldier prepared to fire, the officer beside him, Bruno, stopped him. It wasn't out of mercy, but simply because there were no survivors left in their wake. With reinforcements trailing behind, there was no need to waste bullets. As Aatami continued his journey back to town, he saw bodies hanging in midair. He felt pity for these people. In this chaotic era of war, he just wanted to survive. But he hadn't gone far before he encountered another group of Nazi soldiers. A man blocked his path and discovered the gold panning tools on the horse's back. He immediately ordered his men to search him, completely failing to notice that Aatami had reached the edge of his patience. Sure enough, they discovered dozens of gold nuggets on the horse. They looked greedy and smug. Aatami signaled his dog to leave quickly because a great battle was unavoidable. The soldiers fired continuously at the dog, but fortunately, it ran fast and dodged all the bullets. Just as the soldiers were about to make their move to kill Aatami, they didn't realize their lives had entered a countdown. A soldier had his head pierced by Aatami's knife. He stared at the remaining men like the Grim Reaper. Killing them was as simple as slaughtering chickens. Bruno, not far away, heard that something was wrong and hurriedly ordered his men to turn around. Aatami's combat capability was astonishing. Although he was over 50 years old, he fought 3 men effortlessly. Just as another soldier prepared to shoot, Aatami immediately hid behind the soldier. Dozens of rounds were fired, yet he didn't receive a single scratch. Instead, he took off a helmet and completed a counter-kill. Just as he turned to leave, the last soldier tried a sneak attack from behind, but Aatami grabbed a pistol and shot directly through the bottom of his foot. To the very end, they would never know that this old man was far from ordinary. When Bruno arrived, he was stunned by the scene before him. Bodies lay scattered everywhere on the ground. He discovered a gold nugget on one of his men. To claim the gold for himself, Bruno immediately drove a tank to chase after him, opening fire in Aatami's direction. To survive, he could only ride his horse and run for his life. The heavy machine gun strafed continuously behind him, yet hundreds of bullets failed to harm him in the slightest. Bruno observed the direction of Aatami's escape with binoculars. Clearly, the distance was close, and he could have gone over to kill Aatami and take all the gold. However, not only did he not rush to chase, but he actually stopped in place with no intention of moving. This abnormal behavior gave Aatami a vague sense of unease. He had to comfort his horse to move forward, but suddenly, it turned out this was a minefield they had laid. His horse, which had followed him for many years, was blown up. Aatami was in extreme pain for a moment, but fortunately, the warhorse had blocked all the damage for him. The gold he had painstakingly dug was scattered all over the ground. Aatami hurriedly bent down to pick it up. This was the only guarantee for the rest of his life. But at this moment, the Nazi troops had caught up. Bruno saw the glittering gold nuggets on the ground, and in this instant, his eyes held only the desire to possess them. Aatami quietly picked up a stone and held it in his hand. He stood up and stared dead at Bruno, seeming to already have a plan to deal with them. Just as Bruno gave the order to prepare to fire, Aatami suddenly threw the stone in his hand. A mine was instantly detonated, triggering a chain reaction in seconds. Smoke obscured their vision, and Bruno ordered his men to fire into the smoke. They absolutely never imagined that Aatami would actually use his gold panning pan as a shield, slowly retreating through the hail of bullets. Not until the smoke cleared did Bruno order ceasefire, but no one dared to rashly move forward. Bruno ordered a subordinate to scout the path. A soldier had no choice but to obey. But just as he quietly approached, a shield flew over. The soldier was instantly turned into human fragments on the spot. Bruno found a dog tag on the ground. Clearly, Aatami had escaped, but little did Bruno know just what kind of terrifying existence he had provoked this time. To get out of this minefield, the crazed Bruno actually forced 2 captured women to walk ahead, using them as minesweepers to clear the path for them. On the way, Wolf received a notification from his superiors telling them to return immediately, or they would be buried there, because the old man they were chasing was once a top Special Forces soldier. During his service, he had killed 300 people single-handedly. Afterwards, someone gave him the nickname the Immortal. From then on, his reputation was thunderous, making opponents tremble with fear. The fact that they were still alive could only be attributed to very good luck. But Bruno wanted more than just Aatami's life. He wanted the 2 bags of gold he carried. After all, winning or losing in the end requires money to live. Once greed conquers reason, destruction draws ever closer. In the battle just now, Aatami's arm and thigh had both suffered gunshot wounds. If not treated in time, it would be difficult for him to continue. To stop the bleeding, he applied charcoal ash to the wound, then tightly wrapped his belt around his thigh, plunged a blade into his flesh, and forcibly dug out the bullet. By the time he finished all this, Aatami was exhausted. The extreme pain coupled with fatigue caused him to fall into a coma. Not long after, Bruno led his men to catch up. They had brought 2 hunting dogs. Fortunately, the barking of the dogs woke Aatami. Seeing the enemies getting closer, it was too late to run. But if he waited there, he would be discovered by the dogs. To survive, he made a bold decision. As the transport truck approached, Aatami quickly scrambled into the truck's undercarriage. But dogs have a keen sense of smell, so he used a small knife to pierce the fuel tank. The gasoline quickly masked all scents, and the hunting dogs lost their direction. Unfortunately, the soldiers still noticed the leaking gasoline. They stopped the vehicle to inspect. Aatami used his body to catch the gasoline. He lay on the ground, daring not to make a sound, until the 2 men moved away from him. Aatami quickly rushed out from under the car, but the hunting dogs discovered him. Wolf raised his gun, and Aatami was hit in the calf. To make his death more miserable, Bruno immediately released the hounds. But Aatami not only felt no fear, he was even somewhat excited. They strafed Aatami with gunfire. With no path forward, he could only jump into the lake because the weight of the gold was just enough to sink him underwater. And since humans need to breathe, they waited on the shore. Not long after, Aatami poked his head out to breathe. Wolf fired a shot, and the water surface instantly flushed with red blood. They thought Aatami was already dead, so Bruno ordered a soldier to jump into the water to retrieve the gold. While the soldier was searching back and forth in the water, Aatami suddenly appeared from behind, slit his throat with a knife, and even inhaled all his oxygen. The water surface instantly churned with red. The 2 men on the boat were trembling with fear. Under pressure from Bruno, another soldier endured his fear and jumped in. That man's result was exactly the same. The last soldier was just about to flee when Bruno ordered his men to execute him, but they suddenly noticed the boat slowly drifting to the shore. They realized Aatami wasn't dead yet. Wolf turned the anti-aircraft gun around and strafed the direction Aatami was fleeing. However, Aatami had anticipated this. A soldier instantly became his sturdiest meat shield. Relying on his superior physical condition, Aatami still escaped the group's encirclement. Bruno watched all this unwillingly. Just as he was preparing to give up, Aatami's beloved dog delivered itself to them, which instantly gave him hope. Aatami went through a narrow escape and finally returned to the town, but the scene before him made him feel deep despair. The entire town had been turned into a sea of fire. What was originally a town of thousands of twinkling lights had been ravaged by invaders into a living hell. Aatami dragged his exhausted body and lay in the ruins. Blood flowed down his thigh. He was almost falling into a coma, but he still held that bag of gold tightly. In his drowsiness, he seemed to have various hallucinations, even hearing the sound of horses, the crying of babies, and explosions. However, just then, he heard a familiar sound coming from outside. To ensure he hadn't heard wrong, he hurriedly walked out of the ruins. The next second, the dog suddenly appeared in front of him, but tied to the dog's collar was a lit stick grenade. To save his dog, he immediately removed the bomb and threw it away, but the shockwave from the explosion knocked Aatami unconscious. When he woke up again, he found himself hanging in midair. Seeing that Aatami showed no signs of struggle, the 3 men slowly left. They took all the gold. This was what Aatami had exchanged his life for. Before he had time to enjoy the happiness brought by the money, these invaders had robbed him of everything. Just after the men left, Aatami suddenly regained consciousness. He tried to use his feet to step on a nail to relieve the tension. Because the distance was too far and his leather shoes were slippery, he couldn't succeed. But in a few more minutes, he would be hanged to death. To survive, he could only hook his injured calf onto a steel rebar, because only by doing so was there a possibility of survival. The excruciating pain caused him to faint. It wasn't until the next day that a plane suddenly flew overhead. The strong vibration caused the screw to loosen, and fortunately, Aatami successfully slid down. Two Nazi pilots arrived here preparing to refuel their plane, but the tanks were completely empty. Just as they were searching the ruins, one of the pilots discovered the dying Aatami. He was preparing to shoot when Aatami suddenly kicked out, and the pilot's head hit a block of iron. The other pilot sensed something was wrong, but just as he approached his companion's body, Aatami went up and hit him with a brick. Now that the immediate trouble was handled, it was time to take back his things. To stop the bleeding, he lit a match and stuck it directly into the wound, then removed the shrapnel from his chest. But even more terrifying was a large piece of shrapnel in his waist. Aatami pulled it out with his bare hands. Then he cut iron wire into small segments, bent each one into a hook, and just like that, forcibly stitched his torn flesh together. Every stitch was agonizing pain, and the pilot had never seen such a scene. Until finally, Aatami poured gasoline all over himself to disinfect the wounds. After dealing with all this, the revenge was about to begin. This group of Nazi soldiers was just preparing to evacuate when they ran head-on into a plane wreck. They opened the cabin door and found the pilot had stopped breathing. But what made them panic even more was that the rope wrapped around the pilot's neck was the very same one they used to hang Aatami. Hearing this news, Bruno felt the hair on his skin stand up. It seemed that staying 1 second longer meant death. He told his men to evacuate immediately. If they hadn't stolen Aatami's gold, perhaps they could have left here. But now it was too late for anything because the judgment had begun. Aatami crawled into the truck.
So...
He handed guns to the women prisoners. The driver didn't sense the danger until a sharp knife pierced through the top of his head, but it was too late. No one could escape their judgment. The driver of the vehicle ahead turned his head and discovered that it was a woman driving alongside him. Before he could stop the car, he was used as a live target on a shooting range by these women. They fired continuously, with absolutely no intention of stopping, because everyone had suffered humiliation from these soldiers. When a subordinate told Bruno that their casualties were severe and few were left alive, Bruno not only didn't stop to fire back, but instead ordered the driver to speed up and escape. But they didn't know the Grim Reaper was right above their heads. The three men inside the tank soon heard a knocking sound. To shake off this Reaper, the driver suddenly braked hard. Aatami fell from the vehicle. Wolf strafed the ground continuously, but fortunately, Aatami reacted quickly and reasonably avoided all attacks. When the tank accelerated again, Aatami suddenly appeared from behind, and Wolf was pulled directly out. Aatami smashed Wolf's arm with a punch, and the two fell off the tank. Bruno saw through his binoculars that Aatami actually struggled to stand up. Bruno had never cared about anyone else's life or death. He only thought about swallowing this batch of gold for himself. Wolf was beaten black and blue. Wolf was beaten black and blue. He knelt on the ground, begging for mercy, hoping Aatami would spare his life. But just then, the two soldiers trailing at the rear arrived. However, upon seeing Aatami's eyes filled with rage, they immediately dropped their weapons and fled. Aatami was not bloodthirsty by nature. He also had principles and a moral baseline. So he didn't kill Wolf, but instead chased after Bruno to take back the gold that belonged to him. Not long after, Bruno reached the rendezvous point. Everything was ready. Leaving here would mean financial freedom, never having to worry about money again. But the pilot had bad intentions. After a glance at the soldier, Bruno immediately understood and executed the loyal subordinate on the spot. From then on, no one would know he was a deserter, nor would anyone know where he was going. He thought he could escape with his life this way, but little did he know, the Grim Reaper had already caught up. Just as they took off, Bruno saw a scene that terrified him. Aatami propped up a submachine gun and fired continuously at the pilot. But seeing the plane about to take off, Aatami actually raised a pickaxe and charged forward. The two thought they had finally left this place. They didn't know that Aatami had managed to hang on to the bottom of the plane using just a pickaxe. It wasn't until the pickaxe pierced through the cabin floor that they sensed something was wrong. But just as Bruno opened the door, Aatami suddenly threw the pickaxe, knocking away the submachine gun, and immediately charged in. The two began close quarters combat. Because Aatami had been fighting for a long time and hadn't eaten for a long time, his physical strength had reached its limit. For a moment, he was no match for Bruno at all, and it quickly became a one-sided situation. But even so, Aatami still struggled to get up, his eyes forever carrying a murderous intent. Bruno ripped off a belt and wrapped it around his hand. This was perhaps his best chance to kill Aatami. Once this ferocious beast got up again, he would die without a burial place. To finish Aatami off completely, Bruno whipped him continuously in the face with an iron hook. Aatami was beaten to a bloody pulp, but even with one breath left, he had no intention of begging for mercy. If this continued, he would definitely be beaten to death by Bruno. Looking at the iron hook in the other's hand, Aatami immediately had an idea to counter-kill him. Just as Bruno struck, Aatami immediately grabbed the iron hook and quickly attached it to the tail of an aerial bomb. He turned off the magnetic release mechanism, and Bruno was pulled directly down. Bruno paid the price for his actions. It was finally all over. Aatami thought he could take the gold and spend his old age in peace, but a wine bottle on the floor rolled forward, and he realized something was very wrong. The pilot had stopped breathing, the plane had lost power, and it was diving rapidly. He hurriedly searched the cabin for a parachute. 2 consecutive boxes were actually empty. At this moment, there was no other way. Jumping meant certain death, but to save his life, he had no other choice. Then he wrapped the straps around his body and secured himself to the plane. If he could survive, the rest of his life would be worry-free. Even if he died, he would be a legendary hero. Bubbles suddenly rose to the muddy surface, and a hand reached out from the mire. Aatami had actually survived. He struggled to stand up from the mud. The heavy gold was his final guarantee. Shortly after, Aatami arrived at the bank. The people around made way for this grim reaper. No one dared to block his path. From then on, there was one more wealthy man here.
Seteleitä. Isoja. Kiitos. Ei ole sitten niin perkeleen raskas kantaa.